Welcome into another edition of Tide and Tiger. This is the pre-championship game look, Alabama and Georgia. I'm Scott Griffin with Tide and Tiger. Rodney Orr of TiderInsider.com. We've got a good one Monday night in Atlanta. Rodney, how are you?
Doing fine, Scott. How are you?
We're doing great. Do you know how many times Alabama and Georgia have met in their careers?
No, to be honest with you, I haven't even looked up the series record.
Well, a lot of people like that kind of geeky stuff. This will be the 68th time Monday night. The last time Alabama won in Athens, as you know, in the rain. I was at that game in 2015, 38-10. They dominated that. Then, of course, they met in the 2012 SEC Championship game. Mark Richt and Nick Saban. Alabama won that one 32-28. But that has nothing to do with Monday night. And, I don't know if it is technically the two best teams in America, but it's certainly the two left standing. And I wouldn't argue vehemently that it's not the two best teams right now.
Well, I think, first of all, you're right. I mean, I think, it's a game of matchups. And I think that when you look at it, Georgia, for example, in their game in the Rose Bowl against Oklahoma, I mean, that was a tough matchup for anybody. Would have been a really tough matchup for Alabama matching up with Baker Mayfield. And they had to survive it by scoring a lot of points, Scott. That's not really Georgia's style. Georgia's style is defense, really just running the football, generally a lower scoring game. Certainly not reaching into the 50s, 54-48. That was a double overtime score, but at the same time, I mean, that's really not kind of the game that they play. So I look at this game as a different kind of matchup. Alabama, Georgia, I think it's going to be more of a conservative game, defensive game. I don't think you're going to ask either quarterback to try to win it for you. I think you're more going to ask those two quarterbacks, just don't lose it. And so I think it's going to be more of that type of game, maybe something similar to some of the past Alabama LSU games, if I had to, kind of label it a little bit.
Well, it's interesting you say that because we all remember 2011, right? The 9-6 game, just a fist fight of a football game. And then what happened subsequently in the championship game, Alabama totally dominating LSU. Let's hear from Nick Saban right now. He said he's only had one team that was as ready to play like Alabama was against Clemson. Here's what he had to say.
I think there's only one that I remember, and that was when we played LSU in a championship game, in New Orleans, and I think it was 2011. I thought the defense played, with sort of a ferocious, relentless, sort of I won't be denied kind of attitude in the way they competed in the game. And but I'd say those two probably rank up there with the best.
All right, that's Nick Saban. The 2011 team was so ready for LSU in that rematch, just like Alabama was against Clemson in the rematch from the year before. Now, how do they take the good from that, Rodney, carry it on while also understanding this is a completely different game, completely different team, and completely different circumstances in Atlanta?
Well, I think obviously first thing is the motivation of winning in the national championship, but also, Scott, I think too, there's so many different factors involved here when you're talking about Alabama, Georgia. I mean, Georgia's kind of the team right now that is presenting this, we're phasing in and Alabama's phasing out. That's what Kirby Smart's telling recruits, is that they're the new Alabama. And I think obviously they're going to be the real challenger in the East for many years with Kirby Smart. So, really when you look at it, I think this matchup right here is just kind of the old hat and the new hat, so to speak. And I think that given the fact that Kirby Smart spent 9 years here at Alabama under Nick Saban, he also coached under Saban at some other stops, including LSU. I think all that familiarity, I think all of those things play into it. And I think this is obviously a really great opportunity for Georgia. They feel like they can take the next step in their program. And if they win, then they feel like they can say, hey, we're the new top dog in the SEC, so to speak. And Alabama, on the other hand, certainly doesn't want to give up their perch at the top.
No doubt about that, for sure. And these guys, as we talked about in the last podcast, are going head-to-head probably as much as anybody Alabama goes head-to-head with right now as far as recruiting, nationally as well as obviously the Georgia and Alabama area. Let's talk about the quarterbacks. You and I have had different thoughts on Jalen Hurts from a lot of other people. He was not spectacular, in my opinion, against Clemson. I do think he has to improve his play against this Georgia team in this game, does he not? Because Georgia's going to be very stingy defensively.
They are going to be very stingy. I think they'll play, and I think Clemson was outstanding up front defensively. You don't find a much better defensive line group than what Clemson had, their front four. The front seven, Georgia may be as good in some respects. Very, very good. I think they're going to be very aggressive. You talked about stingy. I think they're going to swarm after the ball. I think that, they're going to really come after Jalen Hurts. I think if Kirby Smart's looking at this game and kind of evaluating the Alabama offense, in a way you almost wonder, is he thinking, you talked about 2011 versus LSU. Is Kirby kind of thinking maybe when he was defensive coordinator at Alabama having a little bit of visions of going against Jordan Jefferson to some extent?
Yeah.
And again, I think Jalen's a really probably better than Jordan Jefferson, but it's very similar in the fact that he does not really consistently throw the ball well down the field. That's one major point.
Yeah.
And another thing is Jalen can really hurt you with his legs. That was one thing Jefferson could do. That was the main thing he could do. And I think Jalen's probably in that same boat. His forte is his athletic ability. And so I think you're exactly right, Scott. I think that for Jalen Hurts to have some success against this Georgia defense, he's going to have to hit them with something maybe that they don't really expect. And that means he's going to have to be really consistent, throwing the football accurately and giving his receivers, when they're open, when he gets the ball to them, giving them opportunities to catch the ball, catch it in stride, and make some plays.
So he's got to be more accurate is the bottom line. Here's Nick Saban on Jalen Hurts' performance of Clemson and his evaluation.
Well, I think, Jalen did a good job of controlling the tempo of the game, and I think that every player on our team would probably say that there were things that he could have done better in the game. And, Clemson's got a really, really good defense to put a lot of pressure on the quarterback. So I think all in all, he handled it pretty well. But there were some things that, I think we need to do better offensively. And I think that's a team thing, not just a quarterback thing.
Now, what does Jalen Hurts think of his own performance right now?
Well, I'm my biggest critic. I've said it plenty of times before. Nobody can be more critical on me than, I can myself. And, the biggest thing is being able to learn from experiences and, being able to fix them in the future. So, like every game, we try and learn from the mistakes and get better at them and not make them again.
So you heard candid thoughts of Jalen Hurts about himself, Nick Saban as well. Let's compare the numbers to Jake Fromm. Now, Fromm is a true freshman. He started against Notre Dame on the road. I thought played very solidly. They won that game. And his leash has gotten longer, Rodney, as the year goes with how Georgia's developed him. Here are the straight numbers. Completion percentage from 65.6, Jalen Hurts 63.8. Not a lot of difference. But then we get into some different things. Completion percentage under pressure, Jalen Hurts 44, Fromm almost 58. Then you're talking about completion percentage 15 yards downfield, Fromm 53.6, Jalen Hurts 42%. Rodney, how do you read those numbers?
Well, it's like I said earlier. I said just a few seconds ago, the consistency for Jalen Hurts throwing the ball accurately down the field is a key. and giving his receivers an opportunity to catch the ball and run with it after the catch. I think all of those things are key. You've got to be able to make those throws against defenses like this. Now, he hit some really good throws on slant routes, a couple of hitch routes, some flares against Clemson. Alabama ran the ball pretty well. But listen, the offense was not the key against Clemson.
No.
The key was the defense. The fact is the defense basically contributed 14 points to Alabama's 24-6 game. And, Clemson was not going to score against this Alabama defense. That became clear. So you really did not have to take any chances offensively. Brian Dable put together a very scaled back offense. Their system was more of a one-read type thing to get the ball out of Jalen's hands very quickly, and they did that pretty well for the most part. Against Georgia, again, it's going to be interesting because I really think, Scott, this Georgia defense, what they're going to do, they are going to swarm the run for Alabama,
no doubt,
and really try to make Jalen Hurts beat you throwing the football. Now, I'll say this too. I feel kind of confident saying this. I think that Georgia has had some consultation throughout the year as they've prepared for this potential matchup. Now keep in mind, Georgia initially thought this game would take place in the SEC championship,
right?
Not for the national championship.
Right.
So they started very early in the season, just before midseason, starting to prepare to play for Alabama in terms of just maybe some schemes and things that they would like to do that would be beneficial. And I think one of the things that that they really made the decision early on was, based on some of the consultations they had from other coaches that helped them out, was to the key was to make Jalen Hurts beat you throwing the football.
And I think there is no doubt that is exactly what Georgia's game plan will be for sure. And we'll see what happens on that. But I think you would agree with me. Alabama will not win this game with a similar performance from the quarterback position that they had against Clemson. I think not only do they have to take shots downfield, and that's what everybody always says, take shots downfield. I go a step further. You're going to have to make shots downfield. You agree with that?
Yeah. Well, I do. I think that, again, it depends on exactly how Alabama's defense can. I don't think they're going to shut down Georgia's offense as effectively as they did Clemson's. I do think Georgia's going to have a little bit of success running the football. I think they could. Obviously, I think they've got a more physical, running game than what Clemson did. They've got better running backs. They've got Sony Michel, obviously, who was outstanding, had 180-plus against Oklahoma. Chubb is tremendous. He had over 140. And then DeAndre Swift's a true freshman that kind of makes that a three-headed monster. You've got Jake Fromm, like you said. He makes throws, Scott, when he has to, and he's becoming more and more effective throwing the ball down the field. So the key is, how does Alabama, slow down the Georgia offense? Are they effective doing that? And I think from there, you'll figure out what Alabama has to do offensively. How do they have to play the game? And Alabama really wants to play it probably much like they did Clemson, where they don't have to ask the quarterback to do a whole lot, and that they can run it a little bit, maybe manufacture some points in some ways like they did against Clemson, maybe a non-offensive touchdown, and maybe set up a touchdown with some special teams or whatever it might be. So I think that's how, when you look at Alabama, maybe that's how this game would go in their favor.
Okay, but I've got to question that right there. And I think you're right, but I'm just questioning what you say from the standpoint of, you have the SEC reigning Offensive Player of the Year from last year, and you're telling me that you got to hopefully ask him not to do too much. Isn't that problematic right there?
Well, let me put it to you this way. And listen,
and I'm not saying you're wrong. I just think it's interesting,
Yeah. I'm breaking down, I'm just breaking it down as I see it, not necessarily as a criticism. So let me be clear. If you look at the Florida State game in the opener, first of all, I think in that game, Florida State came in the season. They were very good. They had some injuries. Obviously, DeAndre Francois, losing him in that Alabama game late, hurt them. But they were a very good team in that first game. Great defensively in terms of the athletic ability. All right, you look how that game went. It took special teams, turnovers, and all of those things to help Alabama win. Put up 24 points and win the game. Okay, so you look at the Clemson game last week. And it much the same way. It took some special teams field position that really was helpful to Alabama. It took a great play by Anthony Jennings when the game was 10-6 and Clemson was driving. He hit Bryant as he was throwing. Deron Payne came up with the ball, and then Alabama goes in to score. Then they get the pick six from Mack Wilson when Levi Wallace makes the play. Breaks up the pass, tips it up in the air, and Mack Wilson returns it for a touchdown. So I look at those games that they've won that are really against quality defenses or, very athletic defenses, certainly. And it's been the same formula. I mean, so it's really not been anything necessarily from the offensive side that tells me that Alabama's going to go in and be extremely productive offensively and, not need some help maybe from special teams or even, the defense in terms of a non-offensive touchdown or interception return or whatever it might be. So that's just the kind of the formula, right? I mean, that's just the way I kind of see it.
The only exception, let me stop you there, because the only exception, because you were talking about it and I was trying to think, is maybe Mississippi State, right? Where we would have to tip our hats to Jalen Hurts and how he performed, especially at the end of that game. But he did connect on some downfield passes, right?
But we're not going to confuse Mississippi State with these other teams.
Not but a quality team and a pretty good defense. Not a bad defense.
Not bad. He hit a couple of slant routes. And again, I give him credit for that drive. He had a nice throw to Ridley.
Yeah.
And then the slant route to Devontae Smith and that. But, we're talking about, that we're talking about standing back there, making throws, being able to, find your second, third guy, create some things with your ability to throw the ball down the field. And I mean, all I'm saying is that we really haven't seen that against a top-notch athletic defense. And if you're asking me to kind of analyze how I think this game will go, I would say I would tend to believe it would go more the way we saw against Florida State and Clemson than I would say it would go any other way. With the offense being extremely productive and, scoring a lot of points and making plays in the passing game. Because I just think when you look at it, it's more reasonable to expect what we've seen, the other formula that we've seen.
Right. Let's hear from Nick Saban on Jake Fromm. He's the other guy, not to be forgotten, because I think he's gotten really improved his game as a true freshman. And, Georgia kind of gives him a pretty long rope now. Here's what Nick Saban thinks about Jake Fromm.
We thought he was a fantastic player, very instinctive, very smart, makes great choices and decisions, doesn't always puts his team in the best play that they can be in. I think he does a lot of check with me's, which for a freshman quarterback is probably demonstrates his knowledge of the game and preparation and intelligence. And, he's always been was a fantastic passer and remains that way. And, we thought he was a great player. We had him in camp, and, we were excited to have him be a part of our program, but we also understood when Kirby went to Georgia and Kirby was recruiting him that, there was a chance of that happening.
How close were they from Jake Fromm even being on the Crimson Tide?
Scott, Jake Fromm actually committed to Alabama. He was committed to Alabama for a while. He would have been, their freshman quarterback this year in that signing class. And then he was obviously recruited out of the state of Georgia by Kirby Smart, who was then the defensive coordinator at Alabama. And when Kirby got the job at Georgia, it was a short time later that Jake Fromm flipped over to Georgia, which wasn't unexpected by any means, because he actually grew up a Georgia fan, wanted to play at Georgia, but, because he was not necessarily thrilled with the idea possibly of playing with Mark Richt, he came to and committed to Alabama. and then he switched. So that's where he is now. And, Alabama ended up in the class really, really in a good position, though, with when they landed Tua Tagovailoa.
Jake Fromm, I think, is going to be very key for Georgia, like Jalen Hurts is as well. And, sometimes these things happen where there are other keys, but certainly quarterback play will be very important in these games. Scott Griffin of Tide and Tiger, Rodney Orr of TiderInsider.com. Only $48 a year to get in on that and all the great message forums. We have the podcast, the videos, football practice, interviews, basketball, whatever, always on the sites there. A little history to the college football playoff rankings. Georgia's the number 3 team, Alabama number 4, so 1 and 2 are out. It's the first number 3 team to advance, and it's the first time in the 4-year history of the college football playoff that neither the 1 or 2 team advanced to the final. A lot of people might find that interesting. We go to some of the numbers here, Rodney, just quickly. Scoring offense, Alabama, Georgia, Alabama 37.9, Georgia 36.3. Total offense, they're separated by 9 yards, both over 440. Rushing offense is close, Rodney, 255.8 for Alabama. Georgia 267.4. It's the number 1 and number 2 teams in the NCAA in running the football. Passing offense, Georgia's 109 actually. Alabama's 91. That's something I didn't expect. 193 a game. Georgia 172. Scoring defense, Alabama number 1 in the country. Georgia number 5, and so on and so forth. The only real disparaging here, both teams just so close here in everything, is rushing defense. Alabama's number 1. Georgia is good, but they're number 20 at 121 yards a game. So that's how close, to me, it tells you this matchup is.
Definitely. And again, going back to the familiarity that they have for one another in terms of the coaching staffs, I think that's going to be another factor in terms of maybe a tighter defensive struggle because they're so familiar with each other. But, those numbers, I think, are indicative of the way both Kirby Smart and Nick Saban build their teams. Run the football first. They're very physical at the line of scrimmage. And then on defense, you want to be physical as well, but also, stop the run and pressure the passer. I mean, they'll get after you, Scott. They have some, great pass rushers for Georgia that, can really create havoc. And I think, obviously, they play a very similar brand to what Alabama does on both sides of the ball. Now, it's a little bit different offensively now, but generally speaking, I think what Georgia does offensively is really what, Nick Saban's done through the years. And again, Alabama might be a little different right now with Jalen Hurts at quarterback versus more of a pro-style quarterback like Jake Fromm. But, again, basically very similar.
No doubt. And it's going to be that type of football game for sure as we get down to the national championship Monday night in Atlanta. Let's talk about some of the injuries. Lester Cotton out after his injury against Clemson. J.C. Hassenauer is in. He's played a lot of football, maybe the top backup offensive lineman in America. What do you think?
I think he'll do a fine job. I don't think there's any question that he'll be a nice fill-in for Lester Cotton.
Yeah, normally this might be problematic. I think, again, let's not fool ourselves. Lester Cotton's a starter for a reason, but I don't think this is some kind of nail in the coffin for Alabama at all. I agree with you that he's very good. And you could argue that they may be better pass blocking, at least, with Hassenauer than Cotton. Certainly not in the same ballpark run blocking for sure. Where are we on Josh Jacobs, who we were told wasn't probably going to play with that hamstring problem? He did play, but only was out there for 4 plays. What do we know about that from the intel?
Well, he looks like he's going to be fine. I would expect Josh Jacobs to play in this game and have a role. Again, don't know how much exactly, but I think with his versatility, he can be a very key performer. There's no question about that. And, Scott, while we're talking about the injuries, there's the buzz the last few days. Minkah Fitzpatrick, as you know.
Right.
A lot of rumors out there about him. And I've got the word today. He's full go. Minkah Fitzpatrick's expected to play, not expected to be hampered at all. And again, it's an undisclosed whatever it is, supposedly, according to the rumor mill. Don't really want to get into that part of it because, that's nothing but speculation. But there's no question he missed a couple of practices, or at least some practice time earlier this week. So that kind of generated the talk. But right now, from what I hear, Scott, the things I pick up is that Minkah Fitzpatrick's full go, and he'll be out on the field Monday night ready.
Well, I think you'd have to shoot Minkah Fitzpatrick to keep him off the field, don't you? So. I mean, you'd have to chain him up on the sidelines. It was some kind of reported kidney problem. He had gone to the hospital and done different things, but, and those things can happen. It certainly was nothing that happened in the game like Lester Cotton, where his status is questionable from that standpoint. He did play the entire game. This was something that happened, I'm going to assume, in this week of practice.
Well, the key is that whatever the situation is, that Minkah Fitzpatrick is ready to go. He's healthy. He's obviously a key part of this team, in terms of not only what he does in the secondary, Scott, from his talent standpoint, his versatility, but also just having his presence on the field. This guy's a captain. He's a leader. He's been a leader since he's been here. And, I was just thinking while we're talking about Minkah Fitzpatrick, think about this. I think we lose sight of just how good Alabama's been. Minkah Fitzpatrick, a junior, a true junior, and this is his third straight national championship game. He won it was involved in the team that won it as a true freshman in 2015 against Clemson. Of course, obviously they lost last year to Clemson, and now here they are back in the championship game again against Georgia. I mean, what a career for this junior class and then senior class as well. I mean, that they certainly were in the championship or rather the playoffs when they were freshmen. So Alabama 4 straight playoff appearances, 3 straight championship games. So it's really a remarkable run that Alabama still remains on.
The senior class at Alabama, the 4-year record, 52-5, is the most wins by any class in FBS history. That's all you got to say. I do have a bit of disturbing news as we wrap up the podcast, Rodney. Are you ready?
Fire away.
All right. And you'll laugh at this, but Georgia beat Alabama in men's basketball Saturday. It's the 4th time in the BCS CFP era where the eventual championship game participants met in basketball prior to the title game. Each of the previous 3 times, the winner of the basketball game also won the football game. Georgia beat Alabama like a drum in basketball.
Mm-hmm. Well, I won't laugh at that. I don't think that's funny.
You don't think that's funny at all, right?
I don't think that's funny if you're on Alabama's side at all.
No, it's not very funny.
But hey, let's say this. If you want to flip that over, Scott, we'll say this. How about that? Nick Saban is 11-0 versus his former pupils. So what does that say for Kirby Smart? Is Kirby number 12? Alabama started the season in Atlanta against Jimbo Fisher and Florida State. They opened the season there in that kickoff game. And, of course, Jimbo was a former Saban assistant, and now they're ending it in Atlanta against another Saban former assistant and Kirby Smart. So, you can find stats that work both ways probably.
And thank you for making us feel better, Rodney. We knew you would do that.
I had to do that.
That's right. Don't forget TighterInsider.com. It's only $48 a year to get in on all the great information, super recruiting, written articles, message forums, and then, of course, I help provide the podcast and a lot of the video, as well as WVUA. The coaches show is always on there, too. So check it out there. Also, check out Tide and Tiger, the podcast on podbean.com. The website coming soon, and also the YouTube channel there. So this is the pre-championship game edition. Rodney and I will be back after the game as soon as possible with our thoughts after the championship game and where it leads both teams, and certainly Alabama, as these things wrap up after Monday. For Rodney Orr, Scott Griffin of Tide and Tiger saying so long. Thanks for listening as always. Please leave some comments and suggestions on either of the websites. But we'll see you after the championship game Monday. Bama and Georgia in Atlanta. So long, everybody.